Probably you're marrying into our culture.
We start in 2 minutes. We start promptly at 7 o'clock. So for those who are watching us online, we are going to begin with the presentation of Father Dave Heney at exactly 7 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. To those who are here in church and those who are watching us online. Tonight we have our Lenten night of reflection, and our reflection will be on the archaeology of Holy Week. Our speaker for tonight is Father Dave Heney. This is not his first time to be a speaker here in the church. I believe the last time was for an Advent talk that was in 2019 before the pandemic. And we are glad that he is here. He is an archaeologist himself, and he is, I'm proud to say that he is one of my mentors, especially in adult formation. So and I guess he knows that. So I won't say anything more, but guess that's enough. Father Dave Heney,
Thank you.
pastor of St. Bruno's.
Thank you. Thank you, Father John, Dr. John. I'm delighted to be with you again. This is my second time speaking in one of our liturgical seasons, and I'm especially glad to talk about this topic of archaeology, which has been a subject of mine for many, many decades. I'm the son of a scientist, so archaeology is kind of a nice meeting between science and religion. So tonight we'll talk about just what does the archaeology tell us about Holy Week. And my style of speaking, by the way, can you see the slides okay? Okay. My style of speaking is you are welcome to ask a question during the talk. You don't have to wait to the very end. I find sometimes if people have a question and they wait to the end, they forgot their question. So feel free to get my attention. If I'm looking this way, I may not see your hand raised, so just yell something appropriate in church to get my attention. But so feel free to ask a question all the way during the talk. So just one interesting thing about archaeology, at the very beginning years of archaeology, almost the entire interest of archaeology was on biblical archaeology. People wanted to find evidence of Moses, evidence of Jesus, where Jesus lived, what happened on this spot, things like that. And in the 1990s, it changed. And they were having a hard time finding evidence of specific biblical stories. So archaeology changed to, instead of looking for the evidence or proof of a specific spot, they decided to look at what was life like in those days. What did people eat for dinner? What did they have for breakfast? How did they work? What kind of clothes did they wear? What was the day like? What was the schedule like? What were special celebrations like? So the archaeology of daily life has been the center of archaeology for the last 30 years. And it turns out that the archaeology of daily life has affirmed an infinite number of gospel stories better than just knowing where there's a site. And to this day, which is a remarkable legacy, to this day, every single thing that has ever been dug up in archaeology has either been neutral or confirming our faith. There's never been anything dug up yet that goes against our faith. Actually, what happens is it's actually deepened our faith and deepened our understanding of the life of Jesus. And I hope to share a lot of it with you tonight. So tonight is the archaeology of Holy Week. So I'm going to talk about the 3 days, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and a little bit on Easter Sunday. But specifically, the Last Supper, what are famously called the Jesus Steps, Gethsemane, but not the Gethsemane that you might be thinking of, Caiaphas' house, that was the high priest, and something about crucifixion, and a little bit about resurrection. So the events on Holy Thursday largely occur in this section of Jerusalem, and as you can see, it's a steep, very steep hillside. At the top is Mount Zion, and that's the location of the Last Supper. At the bottom is the Kidron Valley, and kind of where the picture is taken, kind of where the cameraman is standing, is the Garden of Gethsemane. So pretty much occurs in this area. So here's an overhead view of it. This is now looking down on Jerusalem from a satellite picture. The green square is the Temple Mount, where the temple was originally located. So you see the red circle is Gethsemane on the bottom, and at the very top is the Last Supper. So, and these are the walls of the city as they are now. This is the old city walls. But these are the walls of the city at the time of Jesus. So Jesus has the Last Supper at the very top, high level of Mount Zion, which is actually a wealthy area at the time of Jesus. And after supper, he's going to walk all the way to Gethsemane. He'll be arrested. And then he walks all the way back, almost to the same spot, but now he's brought back to Caiaphas' house. That walk is about 1 mile each way, but it's a steep walk. It's downhill to Gethsemane and a very steep walk up. In fact, it's so steep, there's no roads or streets. A lot of it is steps, okay? So this is the site, the traditional site of the Last Supper. Now, it didn't occur in a building like this. This building was built during the Crusader period, about 1,000 years after Jesus. But archaeologists think it was built over the site where the Last Supper was held. However, supper doesn't leave any archaeological evidence, so it's pretty difficult to know where it occurred. But remember, what we really focus on now is daily life. So let's say wherever the Last Supper was, what was the Last Supper like? And archaeologists have determined it looks something like this. This is actually a faithful rendering of what the Last Supper would have looked like. So it's a U-shaped table. Can you see that red dot? Anybody? Kind of? Okay. How about that? Is that better? Okay, so this is a U-shaped table like this, and it was called a triclinium. Tri means 3, clinium means bed, because they actually didn't sit on chairs. They were these blankets and kind of like beds, and they would lay on their left side on the blanket, prop themselves up on their left shoulder, left elbow, and then use their right hand to eat. You see that? So they didn't sit in chairs. They laid down on their left side, propped up by their left elbow, and then they would reach across and eat with their right hand. So now, what's really interesting, and nobody really knows why this is, but the understanding of the place of honor, where you sat around this table was highly stipulated. You just couldn't, it wasn't like first come, first served seating. Now, what's interesting is that the place of honor, we would normally put here, right, at the head of the table, but in the ancient days, it was the middle of the left side was the place of honor. So that's where we know Jesus was. So actually, because we know something about the way people ate, we know something about where some of the disciples were sitting during the Last Supper. We don't know how much the Last Supper cost, but we know where they were sitting. So this is Jesus here. The next spot of honor would be number 2, and this would be number 3. Now we think number 2 is John, the apostle whom Jesus loved. And who do you think 3 is? Peter wished he was there. Judas. Now that's from the text. Jesus says, the one who will betray me will the one that I dip my bread into the thing. So it has to be someone right next to him, right? So how can we know that Judas was here and not here? Because they're both next to Jesus. Well, close. This is where we think Peter was, way down here. This is the lowest spot of honor, right? This is the better honor, 1, 2, 3. Peter is all the way down here. Now, why do we say that? Because Peter beckons to John and says, what does Peter say? Who is it? Something like that. And it says John leaned back on Jesus' breast and asked him. The only one that can do that is someone who's sitting here. See, all three here are on their left side. So John here could lean back and talk to Jesus. Now, because John is on his left side, he's actually facing out this way. So the only one who could really get his attention is someone sitting at this corner. Does this make sense? So Peter actually is, now there's no proof of this, but these are logical inferences based on what we know the way people ate. So Peter is here, he talks to John and says, lean back, and John leans back into Jesus' chest to ask the question. Now, there's something else about, about Peter being here. Okay, remember, this is the lowest spot, right? The person who's in the lowest spot, you know what one of their jobs was? Wash the feet. Apparently, it's not happening. Jesus notices it's not happening. It's Peter's job to wash the feet, and he's not doing it. And so Jesus gets up and washes the feet. Peter is resentful. He's a proud man. He doesn't want to be at number 12. Right? So he's not going to wash feet. Right? And so Jesus gets up to wash the feet of everyone, which is unheard of, the man of honor to do that. So just by knowing something about the archaeology of how people ate, and how they sat, and all those kind of things, we can actually almost make a movie, really, about the Last Supper, about really what's going on. Where John sat, where Judas sat, where Peter was, and all from looking at the text. Does that make sense? So here's another picture of the way it would have looked. So here you see them, sometimes they're up on their knees. Here's Jesus. He's dipping the morsel in with Judas here. Here's John. And here's Peter beckoning to John. See that? And here's a guy lying on his left side. Actually, he's saying on his right side, but normally it would be the left side. So this is actually, you see how low the table is. It's very low. So here's the triclinium table. So that's not a bad artistic rendering of the Last Supper. Now, after the Last Supper, they're going to walk down that steep hillside that's so steep, it's not even a road, it's steps. And I went there in '94 with a group of about 25 priests from Los Angeles on a Holy Land tour. And this is us here at the top of the steps. And our guide has just told us something that made an impact on me. Now, we've been in the Holy Land for some time, and this was not an archaeologically based trip. It was a spiritual pilgrimage. But I was interested in the archaeology. Again, the son of a scientist, I like to know what's factual, what's the evidence, what's true and not. And then he said the magical phrase for me. Now, he said, this is '94, he said, those steps were just recently uncovered a few months ago. They are a brand new archaeological discovery, and all archaeologists believe that Jesus walked down those steps. Now, because it was still an active archaeological dig, you can't see it here, but there was a big fence right here. There, you see some of it right there. As soon as I heard that, I took this picture. As soon as I heard that, I walked down, I walk over to the fence, I climb over the fence, I take a picture right away, in case I get shot by the police, you know. I take a picture right away, and then I take my sandals off, and I start to walk down the steps. Because that magical phrase, everybody believes that Jesus walked down these steps. I wanted to walk down those steps with no shoes, just my feet touching the stones, and to do that. So I did. I walked all the way down to the bottom. Here's the steps. Here's the fence. I walked all the way down. When I got to the bottom, I turned around, and everybody's following me. And this is our guide going, what's going on here? So these are all the priests that just followed me. And now it's open to the public. It was open to the public for about 15, 20 years. And still today you see people take their shoes off and walk down, because that whole impulse to touch the places where Jesus walked is just so incredibly powerful and so deep. However, you see how rough it is. A lot of people were getting injured because they would close their eyes and walk and then trip, right? So now there is a massive fence guarding this, but fortunately at the very top up here, they have about a 10-foot section that is you can walk on, and it's open because it's flat. It's not dangerous. So it's just all it is a set of steps, but it's just very meaningful for people because it's the only set of steps in that area. Jesus would have had to have walked down that path to get to the garden. So this is looking across from where the steps would be across the Kidron Valley here. And this is the Mount of Olives up here. And this is the Garden of Gethsemane area. So this is the garden area right here. And this is the church called the Church of All Nations. And I want to talk a little bit about the church, not too much about the garden, but I want to talk to you about what I consider to be my favorite place in the Holy Land, which is not the Garden of Gethsemane. See, the Garden of Gethsemane is the Garden of Gethsemane. My favorite place is Gethsemane, and I'll show you what that is. So this is overhead view looking down. So here's the top of the Mount of Olives up here. Here's the top of the Church of All Nations. Here is the Garden of Gethsemane now. And then right next to it is the Cave of Gethsemane. Anybody hear of that? Anybody hear about the Grotto of Gethsemane or the cave? So it's an actual cave. First of all, let me show you the trees. These trees are probably 1,500 years old. They're not dated to the time of Jesus, but very close. And I find them very beautiful, just the kind of gnarly bark. And this is inside the Church of All Nations, and this is a rock face that's been left uncovered by the marble. And it's a tradition, this is where Jesus had the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's just a tradition. There's no way of knowing that for sure. Had to be somewhere, and they say this might be it because it's a kind of a open rock face. Now this is the entrance to the cave. And this is the inside of the cave. Now Gethsemane, the word Gethsemane means oil press. Right? So the Garden of Gethsemane are the olive trees, right? The garden. So they would take the olives, bring them into the cave, because in the cave was the oil press. In the cave was the Gethsemane, right? The archaeological indicators of that oil press are right here. This is where there's an altar here now. This is where I say Mass every time I go. It's my favorite place. So why is it my favorite place? Well, the Gethsemane area is famous, obviously, for one night, right? The agony in the garden. Except when you look at the gospel verses, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they each say that Jesus went there every day. It's famous for the night before he died. But Jesus and the disciples would go there every day. Now, we know something about the daily life in those times. Jesus did not have a house in Jerusalem. He didn't have a place to stay. He would either stay with Peter's mother-in-law up in Capernaum or with Mary and Martha and Lazarus in Bethany, which is the next town over. And the disciples themselves didn't have a house there. So what they would do is, at the end of the day, they would disperse. They didn't all live together. They would disperse and find different places to sleep. And then in the morning, they would collect again and come together and go into Jerusalem and do things. Since it says that Jesus went to Gethsemane every day, this is probably the place where they assembled. So they would assemble here in the morning, and that makes sense because a cave is warm in winter and cool in summer. So it's a perfect place all year round, they could meet there. So they would meet there, then they would go into Jerusalem, then they would come back here in the evening and gather together before they disperse. Now, almost for sure, since Jesus was the teacher, he was the rabbi, they would come back to the cave, and what do you think would happen in the cave? They would reflect. They would think and reflect about what happened during the day. Can you imagine them around Jesus in the evening at the end of the day saying, Jesus, wow, what a great sermon you preached today. That was fantastic. Or, that was a beautiful miracle that you did. Or, Jesus, we didn't understand the parable. Can you tell us what it means again? And so they would reflect, right? It's interesting, if you've ever been on a pilgrimage tour, during the day, things are happening very quick. It's hard, maybe you don't hear the guide. And in the evening, it's nice to sit around and say, what happened during today? What, you know? So that kind of reflection, thinking back on the day, is when insights come. It's when understanding happens. It's when you recognize what happened during the day. During the day, the events happen so quick. When you gather together with Jesus and his disciples in the Gethsemane cave, I believe, this is one of the reasons why this is my favorite place, I believe this is where faith happened for the disciples. Not when they saw the events during the day, but in the evening, when they reflected back on them with Jesus, that's when insight, understanding, recognition happens. Does that make sense? So it's a very beautiful thing. And I think also, remember that, I want to show you this. This is a artist rendering. It's a little bit blurry. This is an artist rendering of an olive press, right? So you can see the olives would be put in bags, like burlap sacks right here. This would be a lever cut into the rock as a fulcrum. And then they would put weights here, and these weights would bring this down, and they would crush these grapes. You see that? Or not these olives. Now, just imagine, Jesus is gathered with his disciples in this cave. He sees this olive press here, and he recognizes that he himself is about to be crushed. That he himself is going to have the weight of humanity's sins come crashing down on him, and the arrest and all the torture and the crucifixion. So he's in this cave looking at the oil press and saying, that's going to happen to me. I think it was very, very dramatic and very, very meaningful. So here's actually a little scale model of it too. You can see here's the fulcrum, here's the lever, here's the weights, and then all of the olives would be here. So again, knowing something about olives and how they crush olives and all that kind of tells us more about where Jesus was. We know where he was on the night before he died. He was arrested in the garden, but he went there every day with his disciples, and that's when faith occurred. You know, I mean, that's still the case today. If you have a question and you talk to your spouse about it, or your kids, or a wise person, in that discussion back and forth is when insight and inspiration happens. So I think that's where it happened for the disciples. It happened in the Gethsemane cave. So we have Mass there every time I go, and it's just every time I walk in, it's very hard for me to not be overcome by emotions, because all archaeologists understand this is the only cave in the area. It has the remains of an oil press, the indicators of an oil press. It's immediately adjacent to the garden. This is the place where Jesus went. And then he went to Caiaphas' house. This is a church that's built over it. There's very little remaining of the house, but all these houses had a very, very big vat dug into the ground, almost like a septic tank, but it wasn't for that. It was for water, a cistern for drinking water. And sometimes they would have several of them, and sometimes they would empty one out so that it was empty. And if you were a royal official like Caiaphas, it would be used as a prison cell. So this is where Jesus spent the night, Holy Thursday night. And this is, there's no proof of it, but there's a very likely indicator that this is the cell where Jesus stayed. These stairs are new, obviously, for us to go down into it, but the way Jesus would have been taken into the cell, he would have been lowered through that hole. So this person is in the cell, This is a hole to the floor above, and Jesus would have been lowered on a rope down into the cell. Pretty bleak. This is an archaeological discovery of a number of years ago in which the name Pontius Pilate appears. But why it's important, not only is it, there's no doubt that Pontius Pilate existed, but it's hard to see, but for many, many years, in fact, when I was a kid, Pilate was always called the procurator. Pontius Pilate, the procurator. This tablet, though, reveals that he actually had a higher position. He was prefect. So the small point, but that's what that's about. So that's where it says right there, Pilatus. So now we'll talk about crucifixion and resurrection. Is this interesting so far? Okay. And don't forget, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask anything. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. Why is the place of the Last Supper barren? There's a number of complicated reasons, a lot having to do with politics, of which there's a lot of politics in the Middle East. Because you have three religions, Christianity, Muslim, Islam, and Judaism, right? There's only so much land, and they all want it. And so ownership of property is extremely complicated. It goes back centuries, right? So the ownership of that building is in doubt. And again, it was originally built as a Crusader church, so it was originally a church. Then in the year 1000, Islam came in and conquered the whole area, and they turned it into a mosque, right? So it was a mosque for a long time. And then, almost to make peace, it was nothing. And that's kind of like what it is. It's just kind of like, just to make it peaceful, it's nothing. There was a big controversy 2 years ago, huge controversy, in which the Vatican made a proposal to, I think, increase the tourism hours in the place. And the Islamic people almost rioted because they thought that the Vatican was trying to take over the place and all that kind of thing. So unfortunately, that building, just to keep the peace, nobody does anything in there except visit. And that's just one example, but obviously, there's a lot of tension over there between the Jews and Palestinians and all this kind of thing. So it got caught up in that. So recent discoveries about the crucifixion. So this is kind of the standard view, very common view of crucifixion. It's very important to know that we have no idea how actually Jesus himself was crucified. There was a number of ways that the Romans did it. They just didn't do it one way. There was an incident when Jesus was about 10 years old. The neighboring town to Nazareth was a town called Sepphoris, and there was a rebellion, a revolt. And the Romans will leave you alone unless you revolt. And if you revolt, they will crush you. All right? They won't just stop it, they will crush you. So the Roman army came down and they captured 2,000 rebels and they crucified all of them. Now, how do you crucify 2,000 people at once? Well, a lot of the roads in those days were lined by trees. So they simply tacked everybody up on a tree. So the road for miles was lined by crucified people. This is the road that Jesus would have walked every day from Nazareth to Sepphoris. When Jesus was a young boy, he lived in Nazareth. Nazareth was a town of about 200, 300 people. It was 4 miles from Sepphoris, which had 20,000 people. and it was at a huge building program going on. Herod was building it up with all kinds of structures. So if you're a carpenter and a son of a carpenter in a little tiny town of 300 people, where do you think the work is? In Sepphoris. So every day Joseph and Jesus would have walked to Sepphoris, and part of that time there would have been a year or so when they did that walk, they were walking by 2,000 crucified people. That's how cruel the Romans were. So they did it, any number of ways. Generally speaking, they didn't do it for a crime, like if you committed murder or robbery. They did it only for rebellion. Because it was so cruel, they did it in a public area, like on a road, right? Or in Jerusalem, they do it at the city gate. So everybody coming into Jerusalem would see crucified people. And it was just a warning that, if you come in here, you better don't obey the traffic laws, right? Because this is Rome doesn't play around. So crucifixions were always in the public place, like a road, or especially at a city gate. This was an actual ankle bone with a nail in it. Discovered in the early 70s. So you see, here's the nail, and here's the ankle bone. And the nail is curved here, it was bent. So they think what happened is, as they were pounding the nail, and it hit a knot and bent the nail, right? And this was found in a bone box, in an ossuary, because when people died in those days, wealthy people, they would put your body into a tomb, close it up with a stone, and come back a year later. And a year later, all of the flesh would be gone, and the only thing left would be the bones. And they would take all the bones and put them in a box called an ossuary. And thousands of these ossuaries have been discovered. But if you have bones in a box, that means this person was in a rock-cut tomb. The family came back a year later. This is a well-to-do family. So here is a person named Jonathan. We have his name. And he was a rebel, but he wasn't poor. So he was a wealthy person who rebelled against Rome, and we have evidence of a nail being used. So there's different ways of crucifying. The top one is called a tau, top left is called a tau cross, T-A-U. That's the Greek letter tau, because that's what the wood looks like. It looks like the Greek letter T. And so you see sometimes the feet are on both sides of the wood, sometimes they're together, sometimes they're crossed. There's not just one way. In fact, this was a common way. This is the X cross. See, one thing about these crosses, in order to set them in the ground, you have to dig a hole, and that's kind of some engineering going on there. But here, it's very easy to get two things and cross them, and they kind of match the arms and legs. But what's really interesting, now Jesus could have been crucified that way, we just don't know. But there is something interesting. From the very earliest days, one of the symbols of Christianity was the Chi-Rho. So the Chi-Rho is the Greek letter Chi, which is an X, and the Greek letter R, Rho. And we always knew that was because the first three letters of our Lord's name is C-H-R. So Chi, C-H, Chi, Rho, R, became a symbol in early Christianity. So there's the Chi-Rho, right? But also, it's possible we have an X cross, and then we have here, this could be the head. So this could actually be kind of a physical imitation of Jesus on an X cross. Does that make sense? So you have an X here. See, here we have Jesus on the cross. So here we have a cross, and the row could be almost like his head. So the Greek letter resembles man on an X cross. So here's the actual, we're going to get into the actual archaeology of the passion of Jesus. So Jesus was buried in a stone quarry. Not this quarry, I don't know where this quarry is, but I just picked it because when you're digging stones out from the ground, you're digging straight down, so you're leaving a vertical wall, right? You're digging stones out, so you have this kind of vertical wall here, like this. If the quarry is abandoned, if they stop digging there, then you have this nice straight wall, like right here, and you can dig into it and make a cave for a tomb. And so abandoned quarries were where a lot of tombs were, because you had these straight walls, you could dig in. The rock is relatively soft, it's easy to cut, and you would have a stone tomb. So this is a replica of the Jesus tomb, and it was pretty much like you see in cards now. I mean, there was a small hole with a rolling stone, and the purpose of the rolling stone was not to keep people out, it was to keep animals out. It didn't lock the tomb. It was mainly to keep animals out, and the stone was always big enough to require 2 people to move it. So that way one person couldn't come in and do mischief. It would take at least 2, right? So this is the inside. So now we're inside the tomb. Very typically, you would walk down a couple of steps that would enable people who are inside the tomb to stand up, to take care of the body. And here is this ledge. So this is called an Archaeology style tomb. And I'll show you the others. So this is Archaeology because when you walk in, there's a ledge. And here you see the shroud, the cloth that Jesus was buried in. So you would walk in. Now this next side is a little complicated, but it's very important to get this because it's going to be part of a slide at the very end, because one of the most amazing new discoveries about the tomb of Jesus was made at the end of 2016. It was an astounding discovery that is just amazing. There was a 2-hour documentary on it funded by National Geographic. I can guarantee you it's going to be on sometime this week or next because it's Holy Week. It's called The Secrets of Christ's Tomb. And this was a stunning discovery, but I'll show you at the end. But you have to know how this whole thing works together. So here you see the tomb. Now here's the hillside, and then you have the straight vertical wall. So this is where the quarry was. The reason why this is deep here, actually all of this area, was because stones were taken out. They were quarried out, right? Now, so here's this straight down, and then they dug a cave in here, and this is the tomb. So they dug in, here's the straight rock face, so they dug in, and here's the tomb. Now what is going on over here is this is a rock area that had a crack in it. So it had a fissure or a crack in the stone, so it was considered unworthy of quarrying. Nobody wanted to quarry it. So it remained. So they dug down on both sides. Dug here, and this remained because they never cut away the stone to take it away because it was bad stone. Does that ring a bell? The rejected stone became the cornerstone. It's amazing. So this is Golgotha, this is Calvary. It's actually only about 15 feet high. There's no Mount Calvary. It really is just a rock escarpment that was not cut away, but when you cut away all the rock around it, it stands out. Does that make sense? Here's the city wall. Now this is the key thing. When Constantine came in 325 AD, he built a church on top of the tomb. So what he did is he cut away this whole hillside. All of this was gone. Cut away the whole hillside. So what you have here is almost like an igloo. If you can imagine an igloo, that's what it was. He cut away everything except the cave, the walls of the cave, the sides and the ceiling. So you had an igloo here, and then he built this huge Church of the Holy Sepulchre on top of both structures. So the tomb and the Golgotha, Calvary, are both inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They're only about 30 yards apart, which is kind of a surprise to people. So there's the Holy Sepulchre tomb. And that's the church today. Here's the two domes. And inside, over where the igloo would have been, is this smaller church. Now, Constantine built that church in 325. It was kind of damaged in around 600. And in the year 1000, Muslim army came, Muslim soldiers came and leveled it. And I mean, they sliced off that igloo from the ground and completely erased it. So Holy Sepulchre is built over the spot of the tomb. But the tomb itself, that igloo, is long gone. Does that make sense? So still meaningful. And so in the Victorian era, early 1800s, they built this called an edicule. So they built this smaller structure inside the dome. This is built over the spot of the igloo. So this is walking into the front door of the igloo, of the edicule. And this is what you see inside. So when you walk in here, you're going to walk in this door, and you're going to come to this little stand, which is where candles are kept, burning candles. And then you walk into the next room, and this is a Crusader recreation of the Archeoleum tomb, right? Here's the ledge where a body would be placed. So again, this is over the spot. None of this is from the time of Jesus. This is just over the spot where it occurred. And this is another view of the ledge that at the time of Jesus, he would have been laid on this ledge. So you remember walking into the tomb, you have the ledge right here. This is where the shroud would have been. So let's talk about how authentic this site is. So remember, we have to have, sorry those words can't see them, but we know that crucifixions occurred outside the city wall. Here comes Dr. John. Actually, why don't you bring it up the same size that was? Yeah, and then just move it kind of, yeah, that's it, turn it to the right. Yeah, a little bit more. Is that good? You see it? So we know it's outside the city wall. We want to know where was the trial site of Pilate and Herod. What was the path that Jesus took to the way of the cross? We know it was outside the city wall and at the city gate. Was it actually a quarry? They talk about a garden tomb. Was it a garden? And was it a place where other tombs were? So this is a scale model of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus that's in Jerusalem now. This scale model is about the size of this church, the whole land area, this whole acreage. And it's just a very faithful recreation. So here's the temple here. And the question is, where was Jesus crucified? This is the old city wall here, and this is where Golgotha would have been here, and this is the quarry area here. So this is a map of Jerusalem today, and it was very puzzling to people because everybody was saying that this is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was, but it's inside the walls. And we know that crucifixions never occurred inside the walls. And so it was always puzzling to people saying, how come these Christians are claiming that Jesus was crucified inside these city walls? Because that's Jerusalem today. But recent archaeological evidence from the 1960s has indicated that Jerusalem at the time of Jesus, this is where the walls were. And so now we see that the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre is outside the walls. Now what's interesting is when Queen Helena went to Jerusalem to find the site of the burial, This was where the walls were when she came. And she knew that Romans didn't crucify people inside. And so she asked all the residents, where was Jesus crucified? And they kept saying, here. And then she would say, but it's inside the walls. And they would say, look, we know. We live here. And, you know, people have passed on, you know, all these generations that we hear. I'm sorry about the walls, but that's where it occurred. So they just stuck by their story no matter what. And then it turns out, you know, 1,500 years later, it's actually verified that that the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre was outside the walls. Does that make sense? Question? Okay. So it's outside the walls. One of the ways they found out, this was a map, a mosaic map from that was discovered in that was made in the 5th century and just discovered recently. And it's a fairly faithful representation of Jerusalem. So here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre right here. And this is a straight road that was built over where the original wall was. They took the wall down. If you take a wall down, you have a straight path, right? So they took the wall down. Now they have a straight opening, and they make a road there. So the signs of that road are another proof and indicator that he was buried outside the walls. And there's the straight road. And this is a modern-day archaeologist with a picture of that map, and they still use that map today to guide archaeological digs. For instance, right here is a picture of a church. They're never really sure where that church was. That's called the New Church. And when they found the Madaba map, that mosaic map, they saw this structure. They said, that must be where the New Church is. So they went to where that spot is in modern-day Jerusalem. It's actually a parking lot. And they dug down, and they found that church. So that map is actually guiding archaeology today. So there's the Roman cardo built along the wall site, which just proves it was outside the city walls. And that's a modern view of what that's what the cardo looks like today, the ruins of it. This is a artist rendering of what that road would have looked like shortly after the time of Jesus. This is a great picture because you see all these very, very authentic-looking people from the 1st century, and here you have this little girl handing an apple to this guy here with his hat backwards. This is like a regular kid today. I don't know if you can see that guy. Now, there's 2 possible paths that Jesus took, and there's no way of knowing which one it was. And it was based on this. How dangerous was Jerusalem at the time of Jesus' arrest? Or was it a big event that everybody in Jerusalem knew about and everybody was upset about, like the Gospels say? Or was it a no big deal, nobody knew him, it was just a minor incident? So Pilate comes down for the Passover time because he wants to make sure he's in Jerusalem when it's dangerous. And he would either stay at the Antonia fortress, which is up here, which is a very strong Roman fortress. So if it was dangerous, he would be there. Otherwise, he would stay here, and that's his home, that's his palace. So if it's a peaceful time, he would stay at the palace. If it was a dangerous time, he would stay at the fortress. I believe it was a dangerous time. I believe that everybody knew who Jesus was and that it was that the way Gospel is presented is true. So I think he stayed here. But in any event, there's 2 possible paths. One is there, and the other is from the palace. So this is the present way of the cross today, but it could also have been this way. But they both end in the same place here at Calvary. This is Herod's palace with the stone pavement, the judgment, ecce homo. And this is the way of the cross today, and it's basically a shopping area. It's just lined with stores. Sometimes people get upset when they're taking the way of the cross because people are yelling at them to buy a T-shirt or, you know, a souvenir, and they're trying to pray and everything. And I tell our people, it's actually more authentic that way. They took Jesus through the marketplace specifically to be humiliated. right? So it's actually quite authentic to go through here where people are yelling at you and all that kind of thing. So Calvary and resurrection sites are near the city gate. See, here's the city gate right here. So now we have a quarry, a city gate, outside the city walls. All the different features are adding onto each other, increasing the probability that this is the correct site. See that? And digging down below the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they find evidence of cutting stones. So it's a rock quarry. So here's a close-up of Calvary. So here you have the city gate. Here's the city wall. We're outside the city gate. Here's the quarry area. And this is the rock that simply was not quarried. It was not cut away, so it kind of remains kind of an escarpment. The actual Calvary rock, this is the only thing that's a little bit incorrect about this model. The actual Calvary rock would have been much wider. This is a little bit too narrow. So it would have been much, much wider with a kind of a large flat area on top. And they find, you see this greenery, they found a layer of topsoil placed in this area at that time period that people carted in for the purpose of making a garden. They brought in the soil to make a garden. So outside the city walls, city gate, garden, tombs, it's all adding up that this is the place where it happened. So except for this should be a lot bigger, but this is a very, very, fairly accurate picture of what it would have looked like. Right by the road, everybody walking into Jerusalem would have seen the three crucifixions here. And it covers both. There's the Crusader entrance. So this is a schematic drawing of the floor plan of the church. And the tomb is here, and Calvary is here, and they're just only they're only 30 yards apart. That's a big shock to people when they first go there. I think it's because in our mind we can imagine the crucifixion, and in our mind we imagine the resurrection, and they're two different Easter cards. They're two different images, right? And we forget that it says that he was buried in a nearby tomb. It says nearby. So they were actually in the same, close enough to build one building over both. And these are the steps. This is actually my group in 2006, and this is our guide, Dico. And we're actually walking up the steps that they made to get to the top of that stone, to get to the top of Calvary. And when you get to the top of Calvary, they've built a beautiful Greek Orthodox style altar. This would be the spot, and you can go in here and you can put your hand down a hole there and touch the rock. And then on both sides is glass. So you can actually look through the glass and see the rest of the stone. So a lot of the stone is visible. So again, there's a nearby tomb. And these are called kokim tombs. And kokim means oven. So it's like a pizza oven. So they would put the guy, whoever died, they would put him in feet first and put him in there, seal it up, walk away, come back a year later, get all the bones, put them in the bone box, the ossuary, and then that would be ready for the next relative. These are tombs actually underneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. These are about just 20 feet away from the Jesus tomb. So they think these might have also been owned by Joseph of Arimathea. So here you see the rolling stone here and the tombs there. So again, inside a small building. And this is the edicule, the small building. Now, that was built in 1800, and it's dark. It's because of all the candle soot. It's kind of just black. And it was cracking and about to fall. And the Israeli government said, we're going to close the Church of the Holy Sepulchre unless you fix it. Now, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has 6 denominations present in the church, and they all share administration of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. 3 major religions, 3 minor. So it's Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox. And then the 3 minor are Ethiopian Coptic, Syrian Coptic, and Presbyterian. No, that's not right. Ethiopian Coptic, Syrian Coptic. Huh? I can't remember the other one. It's a minor, it's a small group. But the 3 majors are the Greek, the Armenian, and what they call the Latin Catholics. So they got together and they decided to renovate it. But before I tell you that, we have all these features now of it's outside the city walls, at the city gate, signs of a garden, signs of a quarry, the different paths. And if you put the more things you add up, it just increases the probability and the probability that this is the right spot. Every archaeologist believes that this is the spot where it occurred. However, there's one amazing feature that says it all. Remember I said if you rebel, the Romans will crush you? So almost exactly 100 years after Jesus, the Jewish people rebelled. It was a major revolt. The entire country rose up. They were obliterated. The Romans came and just obliterated them. They kicked all of the Jews out of the area. They were banished from Jerusalem. They changed the name of the city, and they changed the name of the country. The Romans did. Now, the Romans knew that the main enemy of the Jews during Old Testament times, remember Goliath? Remember what kind of person he was, what nationality? Philistine, right? So Goliath, the Philistines were always the great enemy of the Jewish, all during the conquest, etc. So you know what the Romans did? They named the entire country Philistia. In Latin, the word Philistia is Palestina. So that's where the word Palestine comes from. The word Palestine is the Latin word for Philistine, the great enemy. Now, the other thing they do is they find out, the Romans will say, what is your sacred thing? What is your most precious thing? What is the most important place in your culture? Is this it right here? This building right here? They smash it, and they put their temple on top. That's Rome, right? They smash your thing that you treasure, and then they put their Roman temple on top. So they went to where the temple was, the Jewish temple, and they put a Roman statue there of Jupiter, I think. And for some reason, they felt just 100 years after Christianity was also a threat. So they did a lot of investigation. They wanted to make sure they didn't make a mistake. You can never make a fool of Rome. So they did careful investigation of where this Jesus was buried. And they put a temple on that spot. Well, it turns out that the remains of that Roman temple you can see today underneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So the Roman desire to destroy Christianity with a Roman temple actually ends up verifying where it is. Thank you, Rome. You did all the detective work we needed. You did all the investigation. You put the temple on that spot. Thank you very much. You can go now. We'll take it from here. You know. So this is a schematic of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So here you see the tomb of St. Joseph where that rolling was. Here's the tomb of Jesus right here. And these heavy blue lines are the foundation walls of the Roman temple of 130 CE. So this is what it would look like. So here's the Roman temple on top of the tomb, and they ignored the crucifixion site. They just they let it kind of stick up out of the ground. They didn't really care because what concerned them wasn't so much that Jesus died, but the claim that Jesus rose, right? That's the thing that bothered them. So they built the temple over the spot where they believed that Jesus, where the Christians said that Jesus rose. Now, what the Romans did to build that temple is they wouldn't quarry stones. That takes too much time. So they probably went to the temple where the temple was and borrowed stones from the Jewish temple to build their Roman temple on the site. So that's what these rocks are here. Now, this is my second favorite place in all of the Holy Land. Can anybody tell me what that is? You can't, because it's in a secret chapel that nobody can get into except our group. Because our group is organized by an Armenian Catholic travel agency in Jerusalem. Our guide is Armenian, and this is an Armenian chapel that's locked, that nobody ever gets in. But we get in every year because every year when I come back after the trip and I come back home, the first thing I do is I write an email to our guide and I say, get the Gethsemane cave and get the key to the chapel. So this is called St. Vartan's Chapel, and this here is part of that Roman temple, right? So underneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you can see the remains of the Roman temple. This is, besides all the other things I mentioned, this kind of totally verifies that Jesus was actually crucified and buried on that spot. Now, they found on that stone, when I first went there in 2006, this metal frame was not there. But remember I said they borrow stones, right? So these stones come from different places. The Romans took them from different places to build that Roman temple. This particular stone had a very smooth surface. So shortly after the time of Jesus, a pilgrim comes from Europe to the Holy Land. He comes by ship. And apparently the ship had a shipwreck, because he draws a picture of the ship on that stone, and the mast is down, like it's broken. And he has a special inscription. He writes something underneath it. Now, what's interesting is that, the Greek people never went to Mount Olympus to see where Jupiter walked or Zeus walked, right? But because Jesus was an actual historical person, almost instantly after his ascension, there was a tremendous desire of people to come to Israel and see the places where Jesus walked. Because he was an actual historical person, they wanted to touch the stones, as they say, where Jesus was. So shortly, around maybe 200 AD, a pilgrim comes on a ship to Israel, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he draws a drawing, ironically, on the stones of the Roman temple. And this is a close-up of it. So this says, Domine Evimus. So in archaeology, this is simply called the Domine Evimus graffiti. And that graffiti is a good word in archaeology, because a pilgrim would come someplace and they would either draw a cross or something that indicate that they were there. And now, why did he write Domine Evimus? Domine Evimus means we went. Lord, Domine, Lord, Evimus, we went. Now that's because the custom, if you were going on pilgrimage, was to read Psalm 122. You would read Psalm 122, close the book, and then begin your pilgrimage. So Psalm 122 begins, I rejoiced when the Lord said, let us go to Jerusalem. That's the first line. I rejoiced when the Lord said, arise and go to Jerusalem. This pilgrim must have read that, because he goes on this very arduous journey, finally makes it to Israel, gets to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, draws a picture of his ship, and says, I rejoiced when the Lord said, arise and go to Jerusalem. And then he writes, Lord, we went. But because of the shipwreck, I'd like to translate it as, Lord, we made it. Right? Now, I like this because you know, when I take a group there, I'm taking pilgrims there who have the same insight to touch the places where Jesus walked, to be with the places where Jesus were. And this is our ancestor. This is a pilgrim from shortly after the time of Jesus. So it's just a very beautiful event to share that kind of experience. So this is a famous archaeologist sitting there. That's me. So the Gethsemane Cave and the Domini Evimus graffiti are my two favorite places. So we have the trial, the path, the walls, the gate, the quarry, the garden tombs, the pilgrims, and the Roman temple. Absolutely verifies that this is where Jesus, the Passion, occurred. Now, these are the latest discoveries. This is from 2016. It is outstanding. It is amazing. If you see the documentary called Secrets of Christ's Tomb, or just look for it on YouTube, it's about an hour. Now, remember I said that Edicule, that building, was falling down, and they had to repair it. So the Greek Orthodox, the Armenian Orthodox, and the Roman Catholics got together, and they put together a plan to renovate that building. Now, remember, there's 6 groups that operate here. So anytime you touch anything, all 6 have to agree. And to get these all 6 groups to agree in a very tough area was a challenge, but it was a miracle that it occurred. So they had a very professional, ancient archaeological renovation firm from Greece took on the project, and 2 people funded it. One was National Geographic, because they were going to make a movie, and the other person who funded it was King Abdullah of Jordan, a Muslim king. But he considers himself the protector of the Christians in the Holy Land. And he's just been extremely generous to the Catholic Church especially. So these are the latest discoveries. So remember the Jesus tomb. Now remember this scene here. So that's the igloo, right? Right? Sliced off at the ground, nothing left. And you know, it's interesting, the Muslim sheikh who destroyed it, his name was Hakim, you know. But actually that was his name. His name was actually Hakim. Easy for me to remember because it's like he hacked it off at the floor, you know. So there's the igloo. And there's the church inside there's the building inside that needs to be renovated. So they have scaffolding around it. They're trying to repair it. They only have a short amount of time. They only have like 3 months to do it. Now, this is what the tomb would have looked like when Jesus was placed in there, right? So remember the arrow, you walk in, there's the ledge, right? And around it is the cave, which is completely missing, the ledge included. Everything is gone. The walls of the cave are gone. And this is the modern ledge when you walk in today. So they decided, with special permission from all 6 groups, after they renovated the outside structure, they decided to look under the ledge. It hasn't been done in 1,500 years. So they were going to look underneath the ledge. So they're removing the upper marble ledge. And they look down, and they make a stunning discovery. Remember I said that the igloo was removed? It was still there. Now, the roof was gone, but the walls of the igloo were there, and the ledge was there. The ledge that Jesus laid on is still there. What the Muslims did is here's the igloo roof, they collapsed the roof, right? So they simply collapsed the roof down, and all of that rubble ended up protecting the ledge. So remember I said the Romans' desire to crush Christianity by building the temple ended up verifying it? The Muslims' desire to destroy the igloo ended up preserving the ledge. All that rubble preserved the ledge. So they were able to uncover it. And there's a Franciscan priest looking at it there. So this is, and then, now they had all kinds of special instruments there, but they said 2 things happened when the final ledge was revealed. They said everybody could smell roses, and all of the electric machines went crazy, like an electromagnetic pulse. That happened once. It was never be able to recreate it. So it was simply written down as an anecdote, as an observation, because it was not able to be repeated. But they did analysis of the mortar and carbon-14 dating of the mortar, and it was all dated to the time of Constantine, and the ledge to the time of 1st century. So amazing, 2016, in December of 2016, we've discovered that the ledge that Jesus was laid on survived, and it's still there. So, that's it. Thank you. It's just nice to know. I mean, this is obviously there's a lot of wars there, a lot of strife, a lot of conflict, arguing over religious sites and all that. It's just amazing that of all the places, that, especially in the Holy Land, I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in tourism, right? If you can say that Jesus did something right here, and there's the gift shop, you can make some money. So there's a lot of people claiming that Jesus did this here, Jesus did that there. When I go there, I only go to archaeologically verified places. But it's just, I've always found it amazing that of all the places where you can see Jesus did this here, that there, it's just amazing to me that in this incredibly violent, troubled area, the most archaeologically verified site of all are the sites of the crucifixion and the resurrection, right? I mean, it's one thing to know where Jesus, maybe we can prove that Jesus said the parable here, or he spoke to the Pharisees here. But the fact that the centerpiece of our faith, which we're celebrating this week, Good Friday and Holy Saturday and Easter Sunday, are the most archaeologically verified sites in all of the Holy Land. Really is an amazing miracle.
Thank you so much, Father Dave. And I guess this is a very unique experience for us. I don't think we'll find this even if we research in the internet, right? We won't get this wisdom because all of this knowledge is distilled in the wisdom of Father Dave.
Thank you.
And he was able to I thought that happened because that's the only thing I read. I did not realize that the actual ledge was underneath.
The ledge, yeah.
Yeah, the ledge where Jesus was laying. So, we learned something new, right? And we know that the archaeological markers are all there. And then it's good that while we are speaking, we have a relic here of the true cross.
You do.
He mentioned Helena, and sometimes you say, how can they find that? How can we determine that that's really true? But it's outside the walls. He said it so. And then the cross over there has those two tiny bits of that relic. That's the parish relics of the true cross. So at least we have a connection to the real thing. So maybe for tonight, as this is not just an archaeological talk, right? Because these things, of course, would inspire our minds, but all of these bear to our faith. So maybe before we leave tonight, let's just be silent for a few moments and try to allow these things to sink in and to realize that these things actually happened. And after more than not more than, but after almost 2,000 years, we know that we can scientifically find foundations when it comes to our faith. So let's just be in silence for a few moments, and maybe after this you could have like just a few minutes to share with each other what your thoughts are, okay? So maybe I'll give you like 3 minutes just to be silent and let this sink in. And maybe after 3 minutes, can you just go into groups of 5 or 6, and maybe share a little bit of what you have learned tonight. And thank you so much, Father Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, you have questions? Yeah. Mirtha, okay. Mirtha has a question.
Well, our trip has been postponed 4 times. We were going in June, but we just postponed it again to late October. The same group that signed up 2 years ago has basically stayed with the group, so we still have that group sold out. So after October, November, then we will go in June. But the information about it is on my website, just daveheney.com, and you'll see Holy Land trip, and the information will all be the same except for the dates. The dates right now still have the June dates on them. Okay, there's two ledges in the Holy Sepulchre. When you first walk in the door, there's a ledge on the ground. Okay, that's the anointing stone. So that's where they believe that Jesus, there's no proof of that, it's just tradition, that's where he was anointed with the oils for burial. And then if you walk into the tomb itself, there's 2 rooms. The second room has a little higher ledge. There's actually the modern ledge, a Crusader ledge, Crusader period ledge, and then the Jesus ledge. And those are not visible. Yeah. Well, there's a line. There's always a line to get in, and it takes a while. Yeah. Did you have a question over here? Okay.
So the Crusader ledge covers the
Real ledge.
the real one. What's the first one? What's the one?
That's the one that we use today for Mass. You know, it's a modern ledge for because they have Mass in there like several times a day. Well, that's the goal. But remember, the renovation of the ledge or the investigation of the ledge was not part of the original project. The project was originally to restore the outside building. They just said, look, while we're here, can we do this? And so they all agreed to do it, but only under the agreement that they would put everything back. So they put everything back. And then at a later date, when all 6 groups agree again, they might do this whole thing. Yeah. Now, you can do that in Calvary. On the Calvary altar, you can put your hand through and touch the stone. And you can also do that in Bethlehem. Oh, you of little faith. You're not going on our trip. You're not going on our trip.
Welcome to Holy Family.
We don't take scaredy cats on our trip. Just kidding. Bethlehem. Yeah. The only 2 places where you can do that are Bethlehem and the Calvary. Any other questions? Yeah.
Now, when I look at a picture of the Last Supper, Jesus is in the middle. So is that depiction wrong then with what you showed there? Yeah.
Well, yeah, because Leonardo's famous painting, that was in 1570 or something like that, right? These are all Europeans drawing the Last Supper the way Europeans sit, right? Table and everything, and but the Jews, the kind of table I described is Greco-Roman, and the vast majority of people in the Holy Land at the time of Jesus spoke Greek, not even Hebrew or Aramaic, and they adopted Greco-Roman customs and culture, mainly for eating, you know. So they didn't always eat that way, but for a formal banquet, a formal dinner, especially with a lot of people, they would eat in that triclinium style, and the person of honor. Now, we have families from the Holy Land sell olive wood products at our place, and they have, sometimes you can get a olive wood model of the Last Supper that's like this, the three sides with Jesus on the left side. So, but we're all used to the other pictures, so that's generally what you see. Great questions. Yes. Yes. Well, why do we blame the Jews for killing Jesus? It's unfortunate. There was a phrase during the trial, or during the time when when Pilate is talking to the crowd during the trial of Jesus, and he says, "Do you want me to crucify your king?" And the crowd says, "Crucify him, crucify him." And then they say this phrase, "His blood be on us and our children." His blood, Jesus' blood, be on us and our children. Now, medieval people, or people for many, many centuries, took that as a way of saying we should blame the Jews. The Jews are taking the blame on themselves. They're saying, Jesus' blood be on us and our children. It's an unfortunate, because that's not what the phrase means. The phrase means, it simply means, Pilate says, do you want me to crucify him? And the crowd says, yes, we really do. That's what it means. So it's like, if you say, I'm telling the truth, cross my heart and hope to die. Well, you don't hope to die, right? It's just a phrase. It's just a phrase to kind of accentuate that I'm really telling the truth. Cross my heart and hope to die. If what I'm saying is not true, your blood be on me and my children, right? So it's an unfortunate phrase that many people down through the centuries took to use to blame the Jews for having Jesus killed. Now, the Romans did it. Now, the Jews could have done it years earlier, but the Romans took away the power of the Jews to execute people as part of their domination of the Jewish people. So that's why the Jewish leaders had to go to Pilate to have him put to death, because the Romans took away the legal ability for Jewish people to kill Jesus. But Luke, the Gospel of Luke, is very clear that Pilate did it, and but different emphasis on different things have unfortunately kind of accused the Jews of being Christ killers. Now, the official position of the Catholic Church is that both Pilate and Herod and Caiaphas had Jesus put to death. But the blame stops with them. It does not go on to their children. Okay, so we understand that the Romans and the Jews conspired to put Jesus to death. Crucify him, right? But the blame stops with them. It doesn't go on to generations. So both are complicit, Romans and Jews. But the Romans are specifically Pilate, and the Jews are Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin.
other tomb that the other religion is saying that
Yeah.
the real tomb is that one.
So just outside the city gate, there is a tomb called the Garden Tomb. It was kind of developed in the 1880s by a British general, General Gordon, who happened to look out the window of his hotel, and he saw a vertical cliff face, and because of the indentations and the shadows, it looked like a skull. So he goes, outside the city walls, outside the city gate, a skull, the place of the skull. And then there was a tomb there. So they got all excited about it, and it was nice. It was like a garden, plants and everything. So it was developed into the Garden Tomb, and the Protestant community really adopted it because they hated the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is dark, smoky, noisy. It's been remodeled and demolished and rebuilt. I mean, it's a mess. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a mess. And it's noisy and cacophonous and everything. So here's this beautiful garden tomb that's quiet. That must be it. The problem is the tomb that's there was made 1,000 years before Jesus. And remember, the gospel says he was buried in a brand new, unused tomb. And that tomb is dated to the 1st century, our tomb. But the garden tomb is dated to 1,000 years before Christ, right? Nobody believes in that tomb at all. No, they don't. No. It was owned by the Anglican Church for many years, and they finally sold it. And nobody cares about it. There's actually a bus station immediately adjacent to it. So, I mean, it's a garden tomb with the smell of diesel, you know. Now, to the best of their ability, they try to make it serene and everything, and you pay a couple of bucks to get in to visit and everything, but there's not a single archaeologist that believes in it. And I watched a documentary on it one time, and the Anglican guy that was in charge of it acknowledged it. He says, "Look, it's not the place where Jesus was buried, but it's a nice place." You know? And that sounds funny, but Jerusalem, especially in that area, is not a pretty place. It's not a beautiful place. When I tell our people on our trip, I said, "Look, we're not going to Yosemite Valley. Right? This is not a very pretty area, and the toleration of trash there is just extraordinary. How they there's trash everywhere. So to have a nice little garden tomb, like a little park, is really all it is. But it has no religious or archaeological meaning. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Father Dave. And since it became an impromptu Q&A, we'll just wrap it up with a prayer. Okay. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Thank you, Jesus, for this wonderful night of insight and wisdom. We ask you, Lord, that it will help us be prayerful during this Holy Week, and may it grant us more insight and a desire to know more about you. This we ask through Christ our Lord. Mary, Mother of God, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Good night, and see you for the rest of the Triduum. God bless you.
That was great. I think I counted about maybe 80 people.